or workshop survey in the chat. So if you haven't filled it out yet, please do. So welcome to the Penn Science Policy and Diplomacy Group's Science Communication Workshop Series. James and I are the two co-organizers of this workshop series, and this is our third workshop, Social Media and Online Writing. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Amanda Freise to be our speaker for the workshop. Dr. Amanda Freise is the Associate Director of Undergraduate Research in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, and Human Genetics at the University of California, Los Angeles. She previously served as the Research Director for the Center of Positive Sexuality. Amanda is a recipient of UCLA's Distinguished Teaching in the Life Sciences Award and has developed numerous trainings and workshops about effective communication, including the SciComm 101 workshop series at UCLA. She also founded and acted as editor-in-chief for Signal to Noise magazine to provide scientists with the opportunity to start writing for a lay audience. And she created the SciComm Hub to provide resources to STEM graduate students about careers in science communication. And we're very glad to have her here today to give her talk about how to use social media to drive your science forward and to improve communication with the public.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's really good to be here. Let me just get my slides up. There we go. Thank you for inviting me again. It was so much fun to do this talk last year. I'm glad to be here again in 2021. So a few things that we'll talk about today, and then I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll dive into social media. So today what I want to talk about is social media and kind of like thinking about it, broadly speaking, for its reach and the power that it has, its influence, the goals and the benefits that of using social media as scientists. We'll talk a little bit about getting some practice actually creating content and posts, finding the variety of communities that are available to you on social media, and then doing some networking, and then some considerations that we all have when we're using social media professionally too. So a little bit about me. I've had sort of a varied career, and there were too many things I was interested in looking at, so I have sort of tried to weave them all into my career. So as an undergraduate, I studied genetics and women's studies. I did graduate school at UCLA and got my PhD in molecular pharmacology. And I'm still at UCLA now as the Associate Director of Undergraduate Research in the microbiology department. And for a couple of years, I was also the Director of Research at the Center for Positive Sexuality, because I find sexuality super interesting as well. And so it's been fun to kind of dabble in a few different areas and gain a lot of expertise in more than one. So about my, not personal, but professional social media journey. I've always been really interested in how humans communicate, just broadly speaking. And when I was in graduate school, I sort of honed in on, well, how are we communicating about science? And at the same time, I was a disgruntled graduate student. Between my interest in science communication, or my interest in communication in general, and my unhappiness in the lab, and kind of like this messaging that the only career that was available to me or encouraged was in academia, like on the tenure track towards professorhood, or maybe going to work in biotech. Neither of those was really that interesting to me. I stumbled across the SciComm community and was super excited because I thought, this is combining my two loves. I'm really interested in how people communicate, and I'm also really interested in science too. So this was huge for me. It kind of reinvigorated me halfway through grad school. And so once I began exploring the SciComm community, I found, there's this big SciComm community, and there are other communities as well, which also were really helpful to me to kind of keep my spirits up in grad school. So for example, communities like PhD chat or academic Twitter. And so I explored on Twitter for a while, and I'll spend a good chunk of time talking about Twitter today for reasons I'll explain in a little bit. And I continue to do some science communication today, both on Twitter and on Instagram. And there are healthy, thriving SciComm communities on all the social media platforms. So we'll talk a bit about which platforms you might be interested in today and kind of like the pros and cons of each. Oh, and I forgot to mention too, please feel free. I have the chat open, so if you have questions, drop questions in there or comments, all are very welcome. So first I wanted to start with sort of a warm up and an icebreaker. I know you all may know each other, but I don't know you yet. So we're going to go into the breakout rooms and just think, not in the context of SciComm necessarily, but just generally speaking, how do you currently use social media? So which platforms are you on? There are quite a few nowadays. Are you engaging? Are you sort of just like lurking and following along? Do you have a public profile at any of these platforms, or is it just, private, just for you and maybe your close friends? What sorts of things do you find yourself paying attention to on social media? And I think it's good to kind of like orient ourselves with our personal use of social media, and then we can kind of expand from there into a professional use. So if we could put the breakout, the prompt in the chat, just so that we have, yes, perfect. Thank you so much. And then let's just go into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. Say hello. If you feel like it, turn your cameras on, and I'll pop around and say hi to each of you too. Then we'll come back and regroup and see what you all said. Okay.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to go ahead and assign the breakout rooms now.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, or did you notice like any trends in your breakout rooms?
I would say I feel a little surprised in my group that so many people were so new to Twitter, and specifically when we talked about Twitter, or newish, and we're still sort of figuring Twitter out.
Okay.
So that was noticeable to me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard. Are you have you been on Twitter for a while yourself?
Since 2006.
Oh, okay. You've been there for a while. Yeah. So I think that part of that is just so many platforms to keep up with that even Twitter, which has been really well established for a long time, like still there are people who haven't tried it. So that's good to hear, because we'll focus on Twitter a fair amount today. Awesome. Thank you. Other observations from your chats in breakout rooms? Anybody?
This is Kevin Johnson. My video is not working, so I had that picture up. But yeah, I think it's fair to say our group are more lurkers. I write a fair amount. I shouldn't say that. Our group were more enterers than readers. Nobody really talked much about what they consumed. We had one person in the group who is a citizen of China and an international student, and we talked a teeny bit about the fact that WeChat, I guess it was called, is what she mostly uses, as well as Facebook when she's in the States, but of course can't get to Facebook in mainland China.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Kevin. Yeah, so the platforms, kind of the scope of the talk I've designed to be for platforms accessible in the US, but you make a great point that not everything is accessible outside of the US, particularly some platforms aren't available in China. So depending on what's available to you and where you're all living, you might choose different platforms. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Can I have one more person share things that you talked about in your breakout rooms or things that you noticed?
Something I noticed in our group was the use of specialized accounts. So people would have like a personal account, a very like art account, different close friends, personal Instagram account versus like a more larger following Instagram account.
Yeah, wonderful. I heard that in my room too, kind of like making different accounts for different purposes, because you might want to talk about your personal life, but you don't necessarily want to broadcast to the world, that personal life associated with your professional being on the internet. So great point. Okay, awesome. So hopefully this kind of gets us thinking about, our current use of social media or lack thereof, which is also fine. And now I want to shift and think a little bit about how are we using social media, or why do we want to use social media professionally and as scientists? So for this exercise, just take 10 seconds or so to think to yourself, like, why would scientists want to do social media? And then go ahead and type your response in the chat, but don't press enter yet. I'm going to have us do it all at the same time. We'll take like 20 or 30 seconds for you to type something in the chat. About 10 more seconds. All right, so if you've got it written out, go ahead and press enter. We'll see all the responses come in. All right, I'm just going to start reading through some of them. So amplifying discoveries, disseminating to a broader audience. Yes, definitely. Making work accessible to the public. Yes. Sharing results, recruiting lab members, learn about other people's work, share your own work, job applications, job openings, engaging with community, promote your work, more kind of dissemination of science, especially research funded by the public, making sure the public can access it. Early research result dissemination, kind of some repeats here, non-academic writing, share funny and relatable experiences, stay up to date with research in your field, engage diverse audiences, explain to the public what research is being done in layman's terms, may come off as less intimidating to explain research on social media or talk about it there. Oh, I love this. Conspiracy theories are free on YouTube, but peer-reviewed scientists behind a paywall. Yes, so what do people have access to? That's what they're going to use to learn about. And if we're only talking about science in journals, then a lot of people aren't going to ever have access to it. So we need to be making that accessible. Announce publicly available events, inform everyone about scientific truth, share my readings and work to my findings and work to more readers. Awesome. I'm convinced that this is a really good idea for us to do social media. So there are so many benefits to scientists engaging with social media from everything that you've written there. And so when I was in graduate school and kind of getting into SciComm, like, I don't know, 7 or 10 years ago, it still felt kind of niche at the time. Like, I was like, oh, this is, definitely there were scientists using it, but it hadn't really gotten as popular as it is now. And at this point, it's definitely not niche anymore, although I know that some PIs may feel otherwise. Obviously, nobody that's here. But if we just look at the stats, so thinking about where do people get their news from and who is using social media, 68% of Americans get their news from social media. So like, this is not just, some trendy thing. Like, this is a real platform that people are using, whether or not we should, for things like news. If we look at AAAS, 47% of AAAS members use social media for science purposes. So this is almost half of people in AAAS using it for, for professional reasons. And just like you mentioned earlier, Kevin, WeChat is a really active space in China for talking about science online. So people, scientists are using these platforms. And just like you mentioned, some of the benefits, a lot of people talked about disseminating research, making it accessible. And if we just think about, well, what is the reach of these platforms versus more traditional scientific or professional platforms, social media has exponentially more reach. So if we look at this graph here, looking at Twitter, blogs, and Facebook, exponentially more than something, for example, like a scientific conference or an article when it comes to the monthly audience. And so we want to make our work as accessible via as many routes as possible for all of the reasons that you listed before. And it's clear that social media has that sort of built into it. Like we already know there's going to be more visibility. I'll just go through these quickly. I think you've touched on them already in the chat, the reasons that we want to do social media. So many of you mentioned keeping up to date on the literature. There are there are journals that most journals, I think at this point, at least bigger ones, have social media accounts where they will regularly post quick summaries of papers that they've just put out. We might use it. There was a little bit of talk about kind of misconceptions and relatable experiences, but one that I didn't see mentioned specifically in the chat was dispelling misconceptions about science or scientists themselves. So we talked about kind of the truth, but thinking about, or scientific truth, but thinking about, well, what about scientists? So there's this persistent kind of mythical vision of, what does a scientist look like? And by using social media, we can actually say, hey, scientists are actually really diverse. It's not just this old, trope of like an older white man. Like they exist, but there are a lot of other scientists too. So social media can be a way to let everybody know that science is diverse. You mentioned communicating your work. So a couple examples here of people talking about this person's work with spiders. Here's somebody else has posted some cool fluorescence microscopy. Using social media can be really good practice for your next career move if you are, for example, interested in science writing. And so if you're interested in science writing, maybe after you graduate, if you're considering a career switch, or really if you just want to incorporate any kind of writing into your career, really good chance to get some practice by writing either for any of those social media platforms or starting a blog. So blogging is a really good way to get that practice, just some regular kind of informal writing. If you do want to start a career in science writing, you'll need examples of previous things that you've written, also known as clips. And so starting a blog can be a great way to do that. You could make your own blog, you could write for an existing publication, or you could start one with fellow graduate students. So I've posted here a few examples of science blogs. This one was one that I started in graduate school because some other grad students and I were like, hey, we think that this is important, like writing is a skill that we need to practice with and or need to practice. So we just like made a blog basically for everybody to practice writing about science for a lay audience. And you don't even have to, like blogging, I feel like has this sort of like informal like association with it, and it is, but it doesn't have to end at blogging. So you can start writing in established publications and get paid even while you're a graduate student or beyond. And so all you have to do is look at which outlets are accepting pitches, send in a pitch for an article. Again, it helps to have clips of previous work, such as a blog. So for example, this article was written by a graduate student on the Nature blog, which is a big deal. So, I mean, including science writing and blogging is part of social media as well, just so you know, like why those are coming up here. So I want to give you, before we get into kind of doing some of our own practice with social media, I want to give you an example of somebody who I think has done this incredibly well and built an entire, very successful career around it. So this is someone I really admire. His name is Justine Miller. And I'll just share his website here. So he is a sexuality and psychology researcher. And I had a chance to talk to him after a workshop he gave to say like, hey, how did you do this? Like, how did you build this career? And so he said that as a graduate student in psychology, he basically just started writing a weekly blog or semi-weekly, maybe a couple of times a week, of summarizing just new papers that had come out in psychology. And by doing this for like over the course of a few years, he got a lot of familiarity with the field, of course. He got a lot of practice with writing and people started taking notice. So then he was being invited to write for other publications and outlets. And at the same time, he was publicizing his blog with a bunch of different social media outlets, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think he's active on Reddit as well. So by writing all of these pieces, he kind of became a little bit of a figure to begin with, as somebody who was doing sexuality research, and then started writing in paid places as well, started getting invited to give talks. And his career is kind of just like blossomed all because he started this blog. That's what he attributed it to, was starting the blog, making it a regular thing. And now he's been writing this blog for like 8 years, but he's become super successful and kind of like a name in the field. And it's worked out very well for him. So I like this because it shows that just starting with something small, like running a social media account for a little while or starting a blog, can actually turn into some really profound career changes. You know, he's being invited to like speak all over the world now because of the familiarity and the fame he gained from writing this blog. So it can really have some pretty distinct payoff if you're willing to put in, willing and interested to put in that work ahead of time. Okay, so thinking about the different platforms that are available to you and which one you might want to choose. I've only listed a few of the biggest ones here, and we'll just kind of think briefly about, you know, well, if you haven't made an account or if you're thinking about making a different one, which one would you want to do? So if you're interested in communicating science or getting involved in social media via a more visual platform, then Instagram or Snapchat might be good choices for you. Same thing, if you are curious about making videos, for example, YouTube or TikTok might be good, good choices. And they're both like, they have huge reach as well. We've mentioned Twitter. Twitter is really popular in the academic community. So if you haven't started anywhere, that's where I'm going to suggest you start, just because it's pretty easy to get started on Twitter. Facebook has a lot of reach. It is still the biggest, most used social network. And then there is also blogging if you want to create a blog, although often you'll need to then publicize the blog somewhere else. So you might also want to start a social media account just to say like, hey, there's a new post up on my blog or something like that. So depending on what you're interested in doing, like if you're like, I really want to show beautiful pictures of science, probably go with a visual one. If you really want to kind of like be the face of it and, you know, record videos, if that's something that you find enjoyable, choose something, you know, with a video component. Think about too your career goals. So if you, well, we'll talk a little bit more about like the benefits of each of these different platforms in a second. But anyway, just consider like which of these platforms you might be most interested in using. And then the first step, or maybe you've done this already and you want to, we can continue then. But if you haven't already made an account, then you want to make an account and then think about how is it that you want to present yourself? What is the way that you want to be perceived by other people on your social media account? Got a question in the chat. I'm trying to connect to a specific community for research. Somebody suggested Reddit, but I'm a little uncomfortable with the platform and how people usually interact with each other. Do you have any suggestions? Okay, thanks, Lara. Can you specify, do you mean like when you say you're uncomfortable with the platform and how people interact, could you just give me a little bit more information about what you mean?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of mean like when I've tried to go on Reddit, like I feel like people are really hostile towards the things I have to say, but I also haven't tried like the specific subreddit communities that I would need for this research. So I think it's just like my past bad experiences are making me a little cautious, but it might be different with this community. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So on any social media platform, and I would say especially Reddit, there's always going to be trolls. So there's going to be people who are just like being jerks because they can, and especially because they can hide behind a computer screen. I've had a similar experience on Reddit, but I would say Reddit can be amazing, just like you said, if you go to the right communities. So there's going to be communities who are made of like much broader groups of people. And then some of those subgroups are going to be people who align more with what your work is about. They're going to be more interested in it, probably going to be, you know, easier and better to interact with. So it might just come down to finding those communities. And that can take some time, to be totally honest. I think that's true for any social media platform. Finding the community, figuring out, you know, well, what do they call themselves literally online? What hashtags do they use, et cetera. That can take a little bit of time, but I think it's worth putting in because then once you find them, it's gold. So I think and I'd be happy to talk to you maybe like afterward about what your work is. And then if we can find some communities on Reddit for you to try again.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so thinking about how you want to be perceived. So for the sake of this one, we'll think of this as your public social media account. If you have a private one, that's okay. Like if you have, we're going to try to make a public scientist social media account. So how do you want to be perceived? Because people do this in all kinds of different ways. Do you want to be perceived as sort of like professional distance, like this is clearly a very like work-oriented account? Or do you want to include something that's a little bit more personal? Do you want to kind of share like, oh man, I had a really bad day in lab today, or I'm struggling with this. Does anybody have suggestions? These are like a bit more personal. Do you want it to be, again, kind of like serious or a little bit more casual? Do you want to have fun? Do you want to be posting memes on your account? Or is that like, no, definitely no memes? How much of your personality are you comfortable and interested in sharing with people? So I want you to just take like 30 seconds to kind of think about, well, what do I want to be perceived as? Write down a few words just to yourself that summarize your thoughts. And then in about 30 seconds, we'll go back to breakout rooms and just chat a little bit about how you're feeling like you want to be perceived. And could we get the prompt in the chat? It's perfect. Thank you so much, James.
Good thing. Is that going to stay in the chat once we go back to the breakout rooms, or okay?
Yes, yeah. If it's in like the regular main room chat, it stays there when we go to breakout rooms.
Cool. Thanks.
I'm going to rearrange a couple of the rooms just so there's a more even number of people. So you may have a new person in your room, and if so, please just say hello. Cool, now everybody's got one. All right, so go ahead and discuss these things, and then I'll pop around to some of the rooms and we'll see you in about 5 minutes.
Merge who I am as a person, my whole identity, and not just the researcher side. Because of my experience, I was an educator for 7 years, and I know that the teacher me probably, and a lot of my colleagues, would not have picked up a research article to read it on their spare time, or didn't really care about what these social scientists were saying about their classroom. So I want it to be a presence where they feel welcome, where they feel like, oh, she gets it. Like, it's not just this, a lot of stuff that's really hard for me to digest, but it's simple and it's easy and it's practical. And that's something that I want to do. However, I don't know how to do that. And I have imposter syndrome sometimes, so I don't do it well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So Sasha had said, kind of this balance of, being genuine and personal and relatable and reaching out to people who might not have access to, for example, journal articles. And then Andy was saying kind of on the flip side, prefers to be a bit more, professional, kind of serious, really wants to be credible. And so it really struck me that both of you desire to be credible and want to be able to reach the people that, need to or want to hear about science, but you both came at it from different ways. So there are going to be some people who see kind of like the credible or the sort of like more polished professional scientist as the credible one. And then there will be people who see someone who's going to be more personal, more relatable, as maybe that's more credible. And this gets into like, studies of, human psychology and science communication of like, well, what actually reaches people the best? So in deciding how you want to be perceived, you can think of that for your own comfort and preference, like what are you comfortable sharing? And it's also good to think about too, for the people that you want to reach, what do you think might be the most effective way in reaching them? And you can kind of blend the two of those together to make the image or to write content in such a way that you think will kind of suit both of those needs. All right, so again, thinking about that perception, in addition to like how to actually communicate the work, we also want to think about, other concerns when it comes to perception. So social media has a huge opportunity for networking and community. So for all the graduate students out there, there's a ton of grad student communities, especially PhD chat and PhD life. I found these like halfway through graduate school, and they were so helpful to me because instantly there was a community of people going through the same challenges, dealing with the same things that I was, and celebrating things too. So I highly recommend following those two. And there's also bigger, broader academic communities like Academic Chatter, Academic Twitter. These brought kind of like a realness and again, a sense of community to me via social media that I was having trouble finding in person. And part of that is that, these were strangers, or, at least people that I didn't work directly with. And so it's kind of nice to have a little bit of separation, but also still be able to talk to people working on the same sorts of things. So these are two or a few really popular hashtags and accounts you could follow. Somebody mentioned earlier, or a couple of people mentioned finding jobs. So consider that when you make a social media account that's public, it's public, so anybody can look you up, and we'll talk about that in a second. But consider that if you find a job opening that's posted on social media, of course, then they might, if you inquire further, then consider how your social media account appears to people that are hiring as well. But another good reason to get on social media is that there are job postings that go out. And then just generally, perception-wise, all of you are already on the internet. Like, you already have like a figure on the internet. You want to control that. So whatever your online presence is, you want to make sure that people are seeing what you want them to see. The first thing that anybody will do if they're hiring, if they just want to learn more about you, the first thing they're going to do is Google you. So if you would take just a second right now, go ahead and Google your name and then just see what comes up. I'm really curious. If you haven't done this already, try to do this like a couple times a year and see like, well, what would somebody see if they Googled me? By the way, do this in a private or incognito window, because the browser, I think, maybe saves or like gives you suggested results depending on what they think that you might want to see. So do it on a private one, or like a brand new search that it's not like swayed. And then I'm curious, what came out of this once you do the search? Are you surprised, concerned? Is there anything you would like to show up differently on that first page of results? Richard, is that true? There must be a different Richard James. Okay. Yeah, so if you have a common name like this, you might get more mixed results. But actually, is that like a bad association to have? I think that's pretty cool.
No, it's great, but I didn't.
What came up for anybody else? Is it your professional stuff? Is it social media that is maybe public that you would like to be private, etc.? All of your professional persona. Okay, great, Kevin. Pushing Voice, Laura is fighting for first with a Christian singer. Yes, okay. Yeah, so you might be competing. LinkedIn page, Priyanka, cool. Okay, LinkedIn profile and Instagram account. Yeah, great. LinkedIn, a scholarship one in undergrad, great. Google shows a blue shield with a check mark. Claim this knowledge panel. I have not heard of that. Maybe that's your the blue check you were waiting for, but on Google or something. Okay.
Oh yeah, I noticed
go ahead.
that. I'm sorry. I noticed that. Yeah, you can do that recently. Like if you have at least somewhat of a profile on Google, it'll like start to have like a card on the side, and you can click and actually claim it for yourself.
That's cool that they're implementing that. Not a fan of my high school track stats, but Twitter is the second link after my department profile. Okay, cool. Yeah, I probably still have like some interview I gave in high school, and I was just like, oh, can this just go away now? Like, that does not need to be in my Google results. ResearchGate, ORCID. Yeah, Philip, enhance your presence on Google to click to get verified. Maybe we can dig into that a little later and see what that's all about. A card on UPenn showing up on the side. I don't represent the university as far as I know. That's interesting, Sanjana. So I wonder if Google is just like filling in the blanks and it thinks that you should have that, or it might be because of like some other website that you're on. So if you're seeing things that you're kind of like about, like maybe you want, again, like a profile to become private, you could set that. If there's things that connections that you think like shouldn't exist, you can, contact whoever's running the site and be like, hey, could you remove me or something like that. And then we won't go into like search engine optimization, but there's a whole process you can follow if you want to change those search results that come up for you, in order to like have things that you would like to be showing up actually show up earlier. And yeah, in thinking about that, from those search results, what perception will people have of you? Is there anything you want to remove or change or make private? Okay, so in thinking about how to most effectively use social media, and again, I'll focus on Twitter, but this applies to basically every social media, I think, at this point, because they all use hashtags. The more people that you follow, the more accounts that you're interested in, the more communities you engage with, social media will become pretty busy. And on Twitter, this is especially true. It's kind of just like a deluge of like so much content. Andy was saying that on Twitter, there are 500 million tweets a day. So if you're new to Twitter, or even if you've been on it for a while, I still have to remind myself of this, just let go of the desire to see everything that happens. You cannot. There's way too much. Instead, you want to become kind of a smart user of social media. So use hashtags to see updates about topics that are particularly interesting to you. So for example, if there are particular communities that you're interested in joining that have relevance to you, like if you're working on anything related to space, you might want to follow the NASA account. Or if you're a microbiologist, maybe you want to follow a professional org's account like the Association for Microbiology, et cetera. And then you can see what they're talking about. You can search tweets that they've made or that other people have used to mention them. And then there's hashtags too. So for example, any hashtag that's related to your topic, like neuroscience or science policy, or like other kind of like trends on Twitter, like actual living scientist, like I am an actual living scientist, here's what I do, diversity in STEM, so on. There's probably a hashtag for whatever it is that you're interested in. And you can also just create your own too, if you'd like to try to start something more specific. So for example, on this SciComm account I made, we were using hashtag SciComm quite a lot. And that was getting, the SciComm community on Twitter is really big. So that actually brought in a lot of people to engage with that account. There's a question, how do you use lists on Twitter? Good point, or good question. So a list is basically like a group of people that you put together or that somebody else puts together that have something in common. So for example, I recently made a list about like sexuality researchers, and it was basically anybody that had to do research with sexuality. And then what you can do is if you only want to see tweets or content from people on the list, you can do so. So it's a way of filtering out like everybody else to just see the content that you're interested in. And if you would like, I can show you how to make a list at the end. So you can make the list or you can just search by hashtag. And like I was saying, if the hashtag or the community that you're looking for doesn't exist, you can really easily make your own. So when I was in grad school, I really wanted to meet more people who were doing science communication. And so I had heard of this thing called a ROCUR, or rotating curator account, where you make an account, but then every week or every whatever time period, a new person kind of takes over and starts tweeting from it. So I made this account called I Am SciComm. It was really easy to find people who were interested in curating the account each week, and it started to get more and more well established as time went on. And I didn't have to do anything except for like kind of do some administration of getting people signed up each week. And suddenly it got really big and we had a community that formed. People really want to interact on social media, and you can start those interactions. And the SciComm, or the I Am SciComm account, this is actually from last year. I handed it off to another organization because I kind of, after a while, I was like, okay, I don't need to manage this anymore. But I think at this point, they're probably well over 30,000 followers. And so again, that account got really enormous, and became a source of other people that I could meet and talk to and learn more about science communication. So you could do this too. All right, so in a second, we will take a 5-minute break. But what I would like for you all to do, if you haven't already made an account, go ahead and make one. Don't overthink it. You can always, if you don't want to use it later, that's fine. But if you didn't already, go ahead and just make one for the purposes of practicing today. And then follow like 10 or however many other accounts you can. I would start with whatever hashtags are of interest to you. You can think about, categories or topics that you find interesting, and just follow a few people from each of them. You're also welcome, if you have accounts already, exactly. Kevin is sharing his account in the chat. So go ahead and drop your accounts in the chat if you'd like other people to follow you on there. And then go ahead and try to do a little bit of this, but also let's take a 5-minute break. If you don't get to 10, that's okay. And then we will resume and see what kinds of accounts you've all found. I want to hear from a couple of people at some cool accounts that they have followed. Any questions before we take a break? Okay, so then it's at my time, 9:58. So let's return at whatever time it is over there. What is it? 12 will be 1:03. Let's come back then. All right, see you all soon. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to get a break. Thank you all for sharing your accounts in the chat. Perfect way to start a little community. If your account's brand new, you can get some followers and follow some people. So if you took a second to follow some other people, I'm curious, did you all find anybody that was of interest to you? I'll share with you a few that I like. So if you did find anybody, go ahead and drop them in the chat. So some of my favorite people on Twitter are these three. So Raven, the science maven, is a super cool science communicator. She, I think the way that she got pretty famous was by taking really popular rap and hip hop songs and then rewording them with science stuff. She's really talented and really cool. Darian Nguyen is he, I think, got famous on TikTok for these short videos that he would make of life in the lab that were really, really funny and very relatable. He goes by lab_shenanigans. And then if you want some medical humor, Dr. Glaucon Flecken is also really famous from TikTok and made these short videos of just like medical humor. And I'm not a medical doctor, but I find his stuff really entertaining. Did you find any other cool ones that anybody, or if you already follow some people, would you like to share any of your favorite accounts? Cool. Mrs. Angemi, a pathologist in Philadelphia. Cool. Lara shared her PhD advisor. Oh, that's cool. Your advisor got you into Twitter, Lara?
Yeah, he's kind of big on Twitter. Like he's got 24,000 followers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like he started tweeting about me and I was like, oh, dang. Now I need a Twitter account.
Yeah, jump on that. He can lift you off into fame too.
Yeah, I think it was partially because of him and why I have the number of followers I have, but I don't even have that many. But
that's super cool. And it's nice that your advisor is like supportive of this too, because I do think it's a valuable tool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Philip shared Professional Society, Division of Biological Physics. Cool. Awesome. All right, great. So as you explore, you'll see too the variety of different personas that people have online, which do range from like very much like just here for the science and to be professional, all the way to like Darian Nguyen, like being really silly about science and everything in between. So one of the questions that came up was like, well, how to craft the persona that I want. And much of what I do is I just like look at what other people are doing. Like, oh, this person whom I respect is posting about science, but also sharing some stuff about their personal life. And like, that doesn't throw me off. So maybe it would be okay for me to do that too. And other people would think that would be all right. So you can kind of just see what other people are doing and follow in their footsteps. Some of the things when it comes to actually making some posts. So what is it that I want to talk about when I create my social media account? Sometimes people are posting about like the amazing world of science and how beautiful it is or how interesting it is. So here's a couple of posts, one from Instagram and one from Twitter, just really gorgeous images. That's one of my favorite things about social media is, I mean, the internet in general, but on social media, a lot of times people will share beautiful, beautiful pictures of their work or really anything that you're interested in. So that could be something, if you have some really cool results or really beautiful results that you want to share, you could make a post about that. Several of you mentioned earlier making science accessible to everyone. This is so important. So using social media can be a way to actually do this. So I borrowed a couple of posts here. This person was saying that they are a fellow for this new organization developing culturally relevant Spanish language resources to help Puerto Ricans stay safe during COVID-19. So making sure, for example, that things are accessible in different languages. If you are bi or tri or more lingual, that's excellent. You can post things in different languages depending on the population that you want to reach and make science accessible to everyone. Another consideration is people in the disability community. So making sure that STEM in general, but also content that you make online are accessible. And we'll talk a little bit about that when it comes to creating posts too. Can you share about organic posts versus promoted posts, like for study enrollment or job postings? So do you mean like posts that you would pay for, Andy?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah, okay, great question. So most of the content that people put out is just like a regular post, but these social media platforms, because they want to make money, often offer the opportunity to promote a post. And so essentially that means you're advertising. So if you pay a little bit, then they will promote or make your post show up more in people's feeds. So yeah, that's a really good point. If you have a job posting, or if you're running a study and you want to recruit more people to enroll in it, you could pay to promote the post. These platforms give you some flexibility or some decision in like who the post gets promoted to. I think most often you can choose things like, you know, I want this post to be seen by people who are following or interacting with this particular hashtag, or you can do it by like age and gender and region or something like that. So if you have something you would like to promote, or even if you just want to promote yourself, you could promote your own account if you're trying to really build a following. All of those things are things that you could pay a social media platform in order to do. Does that answer your question, Andy? Awesome. Okay. So yes, things to consider for your post and your account. We thought about how we want to be perceived. Going along with that, who is your target audience? So are you just on social media to talk to other grad students? Are you trying to reach out to the science community in general, and maybe people within your particular field? Are you wanting to make posts that the public will see? So just something to think about. You don't have to have like just one audience, but over time, it will be easier to build an audience and a following if you're kind of being relatively consistent in who it is that you're trying to reach out to. And if you're not sure who you want your audience to be yet, that's okay. Maybe just start with your peers, because at least you'll know kind of like where they're at, and then you can branch out further from there. And then other things to think about when you're making your posts in your account is making sure that they're inclusive and accessible. So are my posts inclusive of and accessible to people of different education levels and backgrounds, depending kind of, again, on like what you want your target audience to be. So if you want to make the public your intended audience, then you'll have to really look at your post and say like, okay, have I included way too much jargon in this post or in this, you know, written piece that I wrote on my blog? If so, I'm probably going to need to edit it, or my intended audience is not going to likely be able to read or absorb my content. Do your posts include people who might have different accessibility needs? So one of the things that comes up a lot on Twitter in particular, but on all social media platforms, is for people that use screen readers, which are basically like text to voice, so it will read out what's being said. If you have hashtags that don't have the separate words in the hashtags capitalized, then the screen reader doesn't know what to do with that. So one way that you can help make your posts more accessible to people with screen readers is if you have a hashtag that has multiple words in it, capitalize the different words, and then the screen reader knows what to do with it and will read them out as separately. And then just generally considering, are my posts inclusive of and accessible to people of all identities? Because like you're talking about the internet and like the world or whatever audience it is that you want to address. So consider like, am I going to make content that everyone will feel included by, or am I leaving some people out? Oh, thank you so much, Laura. She posted follow alt text reminder, an account to remind you to add alt text to images for tweets. So another thing you can do is, what if you have an image that, like an image isn't going to be able to be read by a screen reader. And so the way around that is to include an image description. So basically in text, a short description of what that image is, again, to help people who may not be able to see that image. Thank you so much for adding that account. So hopefully I've convinced you, or am convincing you, that this is worthwhile. But of course, there is data to back this up as well. So for example, one paper that was published a few years ago, they looked at a bunch of Twitter followers of faculty members in ecology and evolutionary biology. And what they found is that up to about 1,000 followers, the people that were following those faculty members were mostly other scientists. But then after 1,000 followers, the follower types became more diverse. So they included research and educational organizations, the media, members of the public, decision makers. And that varied audience was also followed by people who were more diverse. So what this is saying essentially is that if your goal is to share science or to engage with more people, putting in that initial effort to kind of build your following, over time, it really does start to expand and you do start to reach more people. And so if you start now, wherever you're at in your career, and just take some time to kind of slowly or quickly build it, eventually you're going to have the ear of more and more people, and they won't necessarily just be in your field. It does take a little time to build that. And going along with this, yes, whatever your online presence is now, or maybe you don't have one yet, changing it is a marathon, not a sprint. So this isn't going to be something you can change over time. And that's why I recommend just start now and put like a little bit of effort in over time to slowly shift it. And you can use multiple platforms if you want, but I would recommend not spreading yourself too thin. The important caveat to all of everything that we're talking about today is that this is a time crunch or a time sink. Like working on social media is like a little bit of a part-time job. So you should only put in as much time as you feel you want to or are comfortable doing. And then, over time, those efforts will make a difference. Andy asked how much time should folks allocate each week or day? I would say it's really up to you. So I would say less about like how much time you put in every week or day, but more about making it consistent. So if what feels good to you is like, or if what is feasible to you is to do like 5 minutes a day, right? Like one Twitter post, great. If once a week, one Twitter post is what you can do, that's also okay. It's more the regularity of engaging with it. And this is in part to help yourself build a habit, but also the social media, like you're always fighting the algorithm. So these platforms sort of, I don't think that they admit to this, but they reward people who engage more regularly with the platform by making their posts show up more often or earlier. So if you are posting and then you like disappear for 3 months, my sense is that might encourage the algorithm to like regard you as less important. So kind of regularity, I think, is the best way, even if it's not super frequent. Kevin said, I would love to have a person manage my accounts for me from time to time. How common is that? Yeah, super common. Having a social media manager is actually, for organizations and companies, a really common job at this point. It's basically necessary. But for individuals, there are people who do this as well. So if you advertise for somebody that you feel you can trust to manage these things, and then you write the content, or you like give them suggestions for content and they write it, whatever you want, and say like, hey, I need this like a couple hours a week on these days, you could absolutely do that. Because like I was saying, yeah, this is a pretty big time sink. So having some help with it could be really helpful, especially as you grow in popularity. Back to the professional versus not question, to meme or not to meme. I think that there's still kind of this myth of like, professional can't include like humor or, memes. And, if that's where you're feeling, that's also okay. But I would say too that it's not necessarily like they're not mutually exclusive. So using like memes or videos or jokes can actually be really effective when it comes to connecting with each other. So, get creative, choose wisely, of course, whatever you think is appropriate. I'll just give you one example of a tweet that was really popular. This person they had a annual student event, and they created this little video to present their project, which I thought was pretty cool. I'll just share it with you. Yeah, Philip says, so easy for a joke to backfire. Jokes are extremely culture specific. So again, yeah, being intentional, being inclusive with your humor. Let me make sure I get to share my screen. So just as an example of a way. All right, I'll stop it there, but you get the idea. So really creative. This is different. It's engaging. It's kind of a nice change from, looking at yet another slide. And it may not be for everybody. Like not everybody is going to like something like this. But in making this video, this person has demonstrated that they're capable of expressing or communicating their science in a different and unique way. And they probably reached quite a few people in doing so. The tweet didn't get it only got like almost 1,000 likes. I think it was still science heavy enough that it was a little hard for it to go further, but just gives you an idea of yet another way that you can communicate using, something as nerdy as like a video game or something like that. All right, so we're approaching one last practice, which is creating some content. So my suggestion is for you to create, if whatever we have time for. If it's just one post, that's okay. But aim for 2 posts, even if you only have time for the first one in the workshop. And you can tailor this. If you already have an account, you don't need to do an introduction. But if you're new to Twitter or whatever platform you've chosen, go ahead and make an introduction post. So tell us or tell social media who you are. And then my suggestion for the second one would be a post about science. Or it can be about anything, but since we're here in our science communication workshop, that would be my recommendation. So it can be about your work, someone else's work, a cool paper you read, life in the lab, anything you want. And what I would suggest, just so that you can all kind of like support each other, is use this hashtag UPennSciComm, and then try exploring and adding some other hashtags too. So maybe hashtag whatever your field is. You might talk about yourself in your introduction with the hashtag actual living scientist, or this is what a scientist looks like, diversity in STEM. If you're feeling creative and you want to draw something with a pen, you could jump on this other trend, Post-it note science, where you sketch out some research on a Post-it and take a picture of it. So you can play and kind of see what feels right to you when it comes to making a post. And in doing so, remember, who is your target audience? So who do you intend to be seeing this post or this account? Again, if you're not sure yet, then I recommend your peers to start with. Go ahead and work on your post on your own for about 5 minutes, or we'll put you in breakout rooms and you can kind of work together, but then talk to each other for feedback. If you finish early, then you can write some more, or maybe find some other people to follow. Another recommended hashtag is "This is what a scientist looks like." And then once you're done, go ahead and share your post with everybody else in your breakout room for some feedback. You can look back at the slides for other considerations and think again, is my target audience being reached, and is my post accessible to them? Okay. And there were some concerns about like, it can be a little nerve-wracking to get involved in social media, but I think the most important thing for overcoming this is to kind of just dive in. So please don't feel pressured to make the world's most perfect introduction post. It's really, you don't have to worry about it. You can always go back and delete something. If you feel later like, oh, that post just wasn't right, you can delete it. It's okay. The key is to just get started, just dive in and engage somewhat regularly, even if it's just a little post here and there. And if you aren't sure about how to kind of get going with, gaining more followers, following other people that you like often results in them following you back. So that can be something to consider as well. And just have some fun with it. This doesn't have to be a super serious exercise. Just consider this kind of like playing and experimenting, just like we do in the lab. Does anybody have any questions before we go off to work on some of, oh, yes, great. Okay. Do you have any advice on bridging generational gaps when posting humorous content? Oh, that's a really good question. Does anybody else want to respond to that? I don't know if I have any specific advice, but maybe some other people have encountered this. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't know, Sanjana.
I'll say one thing. This is Kevin.
Yeah.
I guess on Twitter, I don't worry about it as much because it's just so easy to ignore it. So I think as long as it's pretty clear, I think the issue about cultural sensitivity is really important. As long as it's pretty clear that there's one audience that's going to get it and nobody else is going to be offended, I don't tend to worry as much about the group of people who, for example, don't get my reference to a movie that's from the 1970s. I just sort of accept the fact that it'll be over their head, but it'll only be over their head for a microsecond while they move on to the next tweet.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. That's a great point. There is so much going on that, yeah, if it's not going to be something that they understand, then they probably will just scroll right past it. Amara suggests maybe using hashtags to clarify it. Yeah, so if you want to like alert a particular group to something that you've posted, then you could use a hashtag like millennial talk or something like that. Yeah, good suggestions. And like you probably all have, if you've already started a Twitter account, then you're familiar with this, but if you haven't, I'll just show you like how easy it is to scroll past things. So looking here, oops, not that one. So how many people do I follow? I follow 1900-ish. And like, it's just almost impossible to keep up with all of the material. It's just so much coming in, especially on Twitter. And so, yeah, that's kind of like going back to like don't worry about it, just get started because there's a lot going on. So same applies for like, if you're not sure if somebody will get the joke, like somebody probably will get it, other people won't, it's okay. Any other questions? All right.
Just quickly, do we want to jump into breakout rooms now for the post drafting, or do we want to give everyone some time and then start the breakout rooms?
Let's go ahead and jump in the breakout rooms, and if you all want to, we'll send. Well, actually, that won't send up. Yeah, that's a good point, James. So let's take like 3 minutes right now to work on posts, and then we'll go in the breakout rooms, and you can kind of start exchanging some feedback. So it's 25 now, so at 28 we'll go in the breakout rooms.
I might just rearrange a couple of the rooms since I think some folks aren't making it for the second hour. So.
Amanda, what was the hashtag you wanted us to use to make sure we all connected to each other on our tweet?
Oh, yes. Sorry, let me bring up those slides again. This one, UPenn SciComm. So please, yeah.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for your wonderful talk. For those of you who are still here, there's an after survey for you to fill out after you've been to the workshop. We also have a certificate program where if you complete 5 of the 7 homeworks, you will earn a certificate of participation for science communication. That link will be sent out in the after workshop email probably tomorrow once we upload the recording as well. As Dr. Freise said, she will be here to answer any questions till 11 a.m. Pacific time or 2 p.m. Eastern time. So have at it.
So Philip, to go back to one question you had about the blue check mark, I think you were asking about that earlier.
Yes.
Yes, so the blue check mark is this coveted thing that Twitter doles out very slowly. I think they used to do it more often, but nowadays I think there is some, I don't think they ever formally say what the requirements are, but basically they want you to have like a pretty substantial audience on Twitter. And then there has to be, I don't know, and if anybody knows more about this, please let me know because I don't know the details. But I think that they want you to like be engaging pretty regularly and then like have some proof that you are you, but that doesn't feel to me like the first like barrier. I think the actual true barrier is like, do we think this person is like popular enough on Twitter to give them a check mark? And I don't know what that threshold is. That person that I was mentioning earlier, Raven the Science Maven, she had like tens of thousands of followers and it still took her a while to get one. So if you decide to pursue one, good luck.
No, suddenly that's evaporated.
Yeah, I've just been like, oh, that's too far away from me. But it's definitely not a necessary thing. Like it's a cool thing, but of course you can still have tons of credibility on Twitter even without it.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have some guidelines or advice for perhaps the junior folks who are thinking of using Twitter professionally, what not to do? Because there may be implications in terms of things being online forever.
Yeah, that's a very real concern because it is on there forever unless you delete it. And even if you delete something, if somebody like saved the cached web page, it might not go away. So I will say personally, I've taken a more conservative stance. I just didn't feel as comfortable talking about more personal things on my public social media. And if one is unsure of where their careers are headed, then I might take that stance as well. I think it's okay to talk about personal things, but just consider like what it is you're saying and the balance of that. And if your intent, especially earlier in your career, is to use social media like as a very public persona, then you'll want that to like, just imagine, okay, if in 2 or 3 years an employer is looking at this, what would they see? And I sometimes go back through my social media and if I like, I don't know, maybe if I was like complaining or something and I feel like, I don't really want somebody to like see that I was like having a bad day, I might delete it. So it's okay too to like prune things and curate things as you go. And yeah, just think about, just have that in the back of your head if it's public, what would somebody else see if they saw this? Yeah, that would be my suggestion. Oh, and Philip said never ridicule anyone, period. Yeah, absolutely. So that goes not only for like what you're posting about your own life, but in the interactions you have with people too. So if you're in a conversation on Twitter or something else, those are public as well. So keeping all of the interactions really professional because yeah, they are on there for everybody to see. Other questions, concerns? Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you for coming, Philip. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming.
Can I ask another question with regards to using analytics that's available for determining what kinds of posts are garnering more exposure? I know TweetDeck is a Twitter product, but there are other analytic platforms like Hootsuite and something else. We've been using that for the Philly Seal project that Gretel mentioned earlier, but I still struggle in terms of what to use in terms of analytics to drive our decisions about posting certain content versus not.
Yeah, that's something I don't have much experience with. I've played with TweetDeck and the Twitter, like built-in Twitter analytics, just to kind of get a sense of, yeah, like which of the posts that I've made recently are most popular. But like analytics and social media optimization is like a whole field that I don't feel super qualified to speak about. But that said, there is a lot of information posted about it online. So if you are digging around a little bit and you're, wondering how to make posts that are like most popular or like how to work with those different analytics, I think Google's going to be a lot more informative than I could hope to be.
Yeah, specifically for science communication, I know that there are memes and other forms of tweets that go viral for sometimes the wrong reasons. So that's not the strategy we want to be using.
Right. And I think, again, it also depends on that audience too. So whomever it is you're trying to reach, like, will a meme be the most effective way, or are they going to just like scroll past it or something like that? So yeah, I'm not sure.
I have a quick question. I think at least a lot of graduate students, especially, earlier in their PhDs are likely to have like a pretty small following or, a modest audience on Twitter or wherever. So I was wondering if there are any like solid like go-to strategies to say if you're like promoting your manuscript or something to sort of like increase your reach other than like, I don't know, bugging your friends to retweet you.
Yeah. So that's where those hashtags can really come in handy. So let's say that you, have a paper that you've published about any topic really. I would include, so like you can kind of cheat the system a little bit. You don't have to only write hashtags that are directly relevant to your post. So if you wrote a paper about microbiology, I would write that up, include hashtag microbiology, but then I would also include PhD chat, academic Twitter, because those hashtags are very popular. People are using them a lot and a lot of people follow them. So by using those ones, your manuscript will probably get a lot more visibility that way. And two, you can also think about the way in which you announce something like that. So maybe you do like 2 posts, and one is announcing your paper and like the details of your findings with the microbiology hashtag. And then another post is, hey, PhD chat community, fellow grad students, I just published my first author paper and I'm super excited about it. That's like a different way of engaging, but one that might be even more effective potentially, because that's like this personal thing that so many people feel really excited about and want to congratulate you on. So you can think too about like the different ways in which you could announce these things and then capitalize on that.
Cool, thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm going to sign off here.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate you coming and great questions, and thanks for sharing your work as well.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cool. So I think this went really well. I think the numbers flagged a little bit in the later half there, but that usually kind of comes with the territory for these.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, yeah, of course, our pleasure. Thanks for joining again. Really great workshop.
Yeah,
like
good.
last year.
If there's anything else you need, you're welcome to share the slides with
Yeah,
everybody.
so I think, well, oh shoot, actually, let me pause the recording.